Leave It to Beaver is an icon of the American family sitcom, and it's also one of the series wrapped in more hard-to-believe secrets than you might expect. Anyone who grew up spending afternoons with the TV on in Mayfield remembers that clean, warm feeling, the kind of every house should be, like the Cleaver's house comfort. But behind that well-behaved surface, there were things people back then simply didn't want to talk about. One moment was censored so heavily, the camera had to avoid it altogether. A nasty real-life rumor once had to be settled with actual court records. And there was even a wartime rumor that convinced much of the country a child star had died. In this video, I'm unpacking 20 secrets from deleted details to behind-the-scenes stories that will make you see Mayfield in a completely different light. And trust me, the number one secret won't just surprise you, it will also explain why Leave It to Beaver managed to live on for decades without ever really feeling old. If you think you already know everything about Beaver, keep watching. There's a good chance you've only ever seen the nicest version television chose to show you. Number 20. The first show bold enough to put a toilet on TV and change American sitcom history. The more I dig into American television of the 1950s, the more I notice something pretty funny. The thing that shocked people the most back then wasn't guns or steamy scenes. Sometimes it was household plumbing, more specifically, a toilet. If you grew up in the streaming era, you might be wondering, what's the big deal about a toilet? But in 1957, American television functioned like the nation's shared living room. What aired had to be polite, spotless, and respectable enough that it almost felt like the whole country was watching in their Sunday church clothes. And somehow, Leave It to Beaver, the famously wholesome family sitcom, accidentally stepped into a cultural battle because of a very simple kid prank. In the episode, Captain Jack, Wally, and Beaver have a baby alligator. Keeping it is fun. Hiding it is the real challenge. The boys think about it in a very Beaver way, where in the house is there always water, so the alligator won't dry out. Their answer is the toilet tank, the water reservoir behind the bowl. And just like that, a detail that made perfect childlike sense ended up stepping directly into a forbidden zone for adults of that era. The interesting part is that the backlash didn't come from the idea being gross the way we might think today. Television standards and censors simply didn't want audiences seeing a toilet on screen, because even the concept of a bathroom was considered too indelicate for prime time. In the end, the production team had to negotiate a compromise that sounds both serious and a little hilarious. They were allowed to show the toilet tank and the handle, but absolutely nothing else. If you think that's strange already, just wait. Because at number 19, we run into a different kind of secret that might be even more controversial. You may not remember Beaver wrong. You might just have watched a version that had several minutes quietly removed. Number 19. You're not remembering it wrong. Beaver on TV lost 3 to 5 minutes per episode. Go ahead and call yourself a lifelong Leave It to Beaver fan. As kids, many of us turned on the TV and saw the Cleaver family so often, it felt like we never missed an episode. But the truth is, you may still have missed Beaver without even realizing it. A typical Beaver episode on DVD runs about 26 minutes. But when those same episodes aired in syndicated reruns, many stations trimmed them down to around 21 to 23 minutes to squeeze in more commercials. You can already see what happens. The commercials gain weight and the story goes on a diet. And the pieces that get cut are usually not the big dramatic moments that make people shout at the screen. They're the small, everyday scenes that give Mayfield its flavor. Still skeptical? Let's test it together. You might clearly remember the episode The Lost Watch opening on the baseball field, but in some rerun versions, the opening scene is often missing. The one where Ward calls Wally down from upstairs. It's only a few seconds long, but it changes the entire feel of the episode. When that piece disappears, the story suddenly rushes outdoors, like it never needed to greet anyone first. Cutting scenes to fit commercials already sounds like classic American television. Right. But number 18 takes us away from the film reels and into a very different story. This time, it's not about a minute being removed. It's about a person leaving the show for a very real reason, and one that is not very sitcom-like at all. Number 18. The real reason Judy left the show. Puberty. You remember Judy Hensler, right? She wasn't a main character, but she appeared often enough that you instantly recognized the face, the voice, and the way she could make Beaver squirm. In real life, Judy was played by Jerry Weil. And this is where the story turns down, a road sitcoms rarely show you. Jerry Weil appeared in 31 episodes before leaving the show. The reason wasn't that the writers ran out of ideas for Judy, and it wasn't some loud behind-the-scenes scandal. It was something very ordinary and very human, but also something considered awkward on television sets at the time. She grew up. As her body began to change, Weil later said the production used binding tape to try to keep her looking like the same little girl on screen. Instead of hearing the kind of reassuring adult line we tell kids today that growing up is natural, she received a colder message. The camera was not allowed to see you change. And then there was one day she never forgot. A scene required her to turn in a dress right after she had her first menstrual period. Imagine being that age, standing on a set, surrounded by adults with one small but very real fear in your mind. What if something shows? That's not sitcom embarrassment. That's the kind of moment where a kid just wants to disappear. And to clear up a long-standing rumor, Weil has said she was not fired. She chose to leave. Now, once you realize how much pressure a simple, proper image could create, it won't surprise you that real life also brought a very ugly rumor that stuck to Eddie Haskell so badly it ended up in court. Number 17. The adult film rumor that smeared Eddie. Ken Osmond had to take it to court. Some rumors ruin your afternoon. Others make you sit down with a lawyer. And honestly, if any character was unlucky enough to fall into the second category, it was Eddie Haskell. You remember Eddie, the boy who sounded sweeter than honey whenever adults were around. In front of Ward and June, it was always, "Yes, sir, yes, ma'am," polite enough to fool anyone. But the second their backs were turned a completely different, Eddie appeared scheming with Wally, teasing Beaver, and still managing to look innocent enough to drive you crazy. A character everyone remembers, which means a name that travels fast. And in rumor culture, what spreads the fastest, the most sensational story available. The nastiest rumor claimed that actor Ken Osmond, who played Eddie, later became an adult film star. This wasn't just gossip between a few people either. At one point, it was printed, displayed, and even appeared on video packaging, almost like a stamp of confirmation. At that point, it stopped being casual talk. Someone's reputation had been commercially smeared in public, and that becomes a serious problem. The case didn't end with a simple denial in a newspaper. It ended in court paperwork. Ken Osmond filed a lawsuit, and the case became a real legal record preserved in court history. Sometimes the only way to kill a rumor is not by arguing about it, but by dragging it under the cold light of the law. And after seeing how a rumor alone can twist real life into knots, let's step back onto the Beaver set. Because there was another strange rule there this time about laughter. Laugh too hard, and the joke might disappear. That brings us to number 16. Number 16. The quiet rule on set. If a line made the crew laugh too hard, it got cut. If you've ever watched classic American primetime sitcoms, you know laughter is practically the currency of success. The bigger the laugh, the more often it happens, the more a show is considered to be hitting its rhythm. Writers build toward punchlines, actors time their delivery carefully, and directors keep the pace so living rooms across the country erupt at just the right moment. But leave it to Beaver, quietly pushed against almost all of that instinct. According to Tony Dow, there was an unusual unwritten rule. If a line made the crew laugh too loudly, the team would remove it. The first time I heard that, I was surprised too. I've spent enough time around classic television to know the 1950s had some odd rules, but cutting something because it was too funny is rare. The more you think about it though, the more it makes sense as an aesthetic choice. Because Beaver didn't want you remembering one punchline. Beaver wanted you remembering a family. A laugh that explodes too loudly can turn a moment into a performance, making viewers focus on the joke instead of Beaver's awkward confusion, Ward's familiar helplessness, or June's calm presence that anchors the whole room. Ironically, that gentle approach didn't immediately win patience from everyone at CBS. Because at number 15, we get to one of the most surprising turns in Beaver's television life. The way it left one network, got picked up by another, and only then started its real journey toward becoming a legend. Number 15. Beaver almost lasted only one season and actually failed before becoming a legend. A lot of people grew up with Leave It to Beaver through endless reruns, so it's easy to assume the show was always a television monument, like it simply had to exist sitting comfortably in America's nostalgia cabinet. But the truth is more interesting. Beaver once stood very close to being a one-season show, just one season. And if things had gone a different direction, Mayfield might be a name we would have to dig out of old television history books today. I've always believed many cultural legends have rough beginnings, that history tends to smooth over. Some things eventually become classics, but at first they're doubted, rejected, or simply waiting for someone willing to take a chance. Harry Potter was turned down by several publishers before someone believed a story about a boy with glasses could change the world. Beaver had its own version of that story, only its battlefield was network television. Leave It to Beaver first premiered on CBS on October 4, 1957, and CBS canceled the show after just one season. In the television world of that era, an early cancellation usually meant the end of everything. There was no streaming revival years later, and no easy upload it again button to find a new audience. Network television worked like a few large city streets owned by a handful of gatekeepers. Lose your spot on one street, and your shop might close for good. Then, ABC stepped in and did something not everyone was willing to do. They picked Beaver up and continued the show starting October 2, 1958. That second life eventually carried the series all the way to 1963, and I actually love that twist in the story. It makes Beaver more endearing. This wasn't a show that was pampered from the beginning, it was doubted. It had to prove that gentle humor and a decent family still had a place on television. And once one network gave it more time, Beaver finally had the chance to become the thing we now call timeless. Number 14. A childhood secret of the two young stars. They were forbidden from watching the very show they starred in. I always imagined the classic scene of a child star going something like this. Evening comes, the whole family turns on the TV. The boy points at the screen and shouts something like, "Mom, that's me," then laughs with pure excitement and goes to school the next day bragging to his friends. But according to Tony Dow, the producers asked the parents not to let Tony and Jerry watch Leave It to Beaver while the show was being filmed. The reason sounded very much like the thinking of adults at the time. They worried the boys might become smug, get a little full of themselves, and lose that natural neighborhood kid feeling the show was trying to protect at all costs. Still, who knows? Maybe the rule existed, but maybe the boys sometimes sneaked near the living room door just to hear the opening theme hearts pounding the way they might if they heard their own names being called. And the part that makes me most curious comes later. Tony Dow once said there were episodes he still hadn't seen until he was much older, which means they may have had to watch their own childhood later than the audience did. I honestly wonder what that feels like when you're grown up and suddenly see a little boy on television that the whole country already knows by your name. But the rule about not watching the show is still the kind of secret that feels almost sweet, the kind a production set might create just to keep kids acting their age. Now, let's move to number 13, which is a much darker rumor surrounding the brightest symbol of Mayfield June Cleaver's pearl necklace. Number 13, the dark legend behind June's pearl necklace. I don't know how many times you've heard this rumor, but I've heard it enough times that I practically know it by heart. The story goes that June Cleaver wore her pearl necklace to hide some kind of secret on her neck. It sounds exactly like the sort of sensational story people like to repeat. The perfect family portrait of Mayfield has a tiny crack in it, and those pearls are the curtain pulled down so nobody sees it. But the truth, when told by Barbara Billingsley herself, turns out to be practical and oddly cinematic in its own way. She explained that there was a small hollow at the base of her neck and under the lighting and cameras. Of the time, it created a shadow that didn't look good on screen. The pearl necklace solved that problem perfectly because it reflected light and broke up that shadow in the exact spot viewers would notice most. Put simply, June's pearls didn't start as a fashion statement. They started as a camera trick so the audience wouldn't get distracted by something the show didn't want them focusing on. But if we're talking about rumors, the pearl necklace is only the warm-up. By number 12, the story gets much heavier and much darker. Are you ready for this one? Number 12. At one point, America believed Beaver had died in Vietnam. Picture a very familiar kind of American evening in the late 1960s. On television, reruns of Leave It to Beaver are still playing. You still hear children's footsteps, and Mayfield still looks neat and tidy like a postcard. But outside that television world, the nightly news keeps reading the names of soldiers who will never come home. Those two worlds really should never collide. Yet at one point, a chilling rumor made them crash straight into each other. For a time, many people believed Jerry Mathers, the boy who played Beaver, had died in Vietnam. This wasn't the kind of rumor you hear casually in a bar. It was the kind that made people lower their voices when they repeated it, almost as if they were talking about someone they truly knew. The frightening part is that it didn't spread because someone wanted to invent a joke. It spread because the era already carried fear inside it. And in an era like that, a piece of information that merely sounds plausible can quickly become truth in the public imagination. And the detail that helped this rumor survive was simple. Mathers really had served in the California Air National Guard. There was a uniform, there was military status, and there was a war dominating daily life. Add a mistaken name somewhere, let a few people repeat it with confidence, and suddenly the story sounds believable in a very unsettling way. KQED later traced the story and emphasized the key fact: Mathers never went overseas and never fought in Vietnam. But the rumor still lived on, almost as if it had legs of its own. What chills me isn't the absurdity of the rumor, it's how deeply it entered real life. One story says that Tony Dow, who played Wally, once sent condolence flowers to the Mathers family because he believed the rumor completely. And when someone directly involved in the show gets pulled into the confusion, you realize what's spreading is no longer information. It's a collective fear. After a story that heavy, I'd rather bring you back to where Beaver truly belongs. Not a battlefield, not the evening news, but a casting room in 1957, where Jerry Mathers landed the role for a reason so innocent, it's almost unbelievable. And that brings us to number 11. Number 11. The unbelievable casting story. Jerry Mathers got the role because he wanted to go to a Cub Scouts meeting. Among all the old Hollywood stories, I love the tale of how Jerry Mathers became Beaver is one of those that makes you laugh the moment you hear it. There's no glamorous moment, no dramatic artistic destiny, and definitely no dazzling audition performance. It begins with a very small and very childlike problem. The boy was worried about being late to his Cub Scouts meeting. Just imagine a primetime sitcom audition where the kid sitting there isn't nervous about the role at all. He's watching the clock. When the adults ask the usual probing question, "Where would you most like to be right now?" Jerry answers honestly that he wants to go to his Cub Scouts meeting. It isn't a clever answer, and it certainly isn't flattery. It's the kind of response that instantly tells adults something important. This kid hasn't learned how to perform for the camera yet. And speaking of real life, number 10 is a twist that leaves a lot of people staring in disbelief. Eddie Haskell on screen is the king of flattery. But off-screen, the actor's life turned in a direction almost nobody would have guessed. Number 10. The real-life twist. Eddie Haskell became an LAPD officer and survived a very dangerous incident. If there's one character in Leave It to Beaver who makes you laugh and sigh at the same time, it's Eddie Haskell. In front of Ward and June, he's polite enough to sound like he's delivering a speech at a scholarship ceremony. The moment their backs are turned, the voice changes, the attitude changes, and suddenly, Mayfield has another layer of trouble that feels exactly like Eddie. It's the kind of character anyone who's watched sitcoms has seen in real life. Perfectly sweet when it matters, but always giving you the feeling there's some calculation happening underneath. And maybe because Eddie became so memorable, the actor who played him. Ken Osmond lived under that character's shadow for a long time, but his real life took a direction that always makes me sit up a little straighter when I talk about it. In 1970, Osmond joined the Los Angeles Police Department. Not as an acting role, not as a publicity stunt, but as a real job with real shifts and real responsibility. He even grew a mustache so people would be less likely to recognize him, almost as if he wanted to draw a clear line between Eddie on television and Ken in real life. Then something happened that reminded everyone this was no sitcom world anymore. In 1980, while on duty, Osmond encountered an extremely dangerous situation and was seriously injured. What people still mention today is that his bulletproof vest saved his life, and even the buckle on his belt helped deflect what could have been a fatal impact. It sounds like a scene from a movie, but it was real life. So let me ask you honestly, if the Eddie Haskell you remember grew up to become a police officer, do you still hate Eddie? And speaking of surprises, do you know which episode of Leave It to Beaver had the biggest budget of the entire series? The truth behind number 9 might be a small test to see whether you're really a Leave It to Beaver fan. Number 9. The most expensive Beaver episode. A soup billboard that made the whole show open its wallet. Do you know which episode of Leave It to Beaver cost the most money? It wasn't an episode with a famous guest star, and it wasn't some huge emotional twist. It was an episode that started with something very childish and very Mayfield. A dare. And it ended with the entire neighborhood watching Beaver stuck inside a giant bowl of soup. The episode is called In the Soup, which aired on May 6, 1961. The story almost sounds like a cartoon. Whitey looks up at a billboard showing a steaming bowl of soup. Then he dares Beaver to climb up and see whether it's real soup. You know that kind of dare. It's said casually, but it hits the exact nerve of childhood pride. Beaver can't walk away. He has to prove he isn't scared. So he climbs up. And then everything goes off the rails. Beaver falls straight into the bowl on the billboard and gets stuck. Suddenly, a quiet family sitcom turns into a public spectacle. Adults gather around everyone staring up, and it almost feels like the whole town of Mayfield is participating in an event rather than just watching a family story unfold. That kind of large set piece is exactly why this episode is one of the ones Jerry Mathers gets asked about most often. But what excites me most is the behind-the-scenes part. Mathers said the production team had to build 2 versions of the billboard. One was outside to give it a realistic look, and another was constructed on a soundstage so they could film close shots of Beaver struggling inside the giant bowl of soup. and you can probably guess that fake bowl of soup wasn't cheap. Mathers once said the episode cost around $50,000, and some sources even suggest the number may have been higher. For a half-hour sitcom in that era, that's the kind of expense that makes the entire crew swallow hard. Number 8. Real Brotherhood. Mathers and Tony Dow were so close, audiences thought they were actually related. Try answering this quickly in your head. Were Beaver and Wally brothers in real life? If you ever believed they were, you're definitely not alone. That idea followed. Leave It to Beaver for decades. Every time the show aired again, someone would ask the question, and someone else would confidently say, "Those two are real brothers." And here's the interesting part. No, they weren't related. But there's a reason millions of viewers believed it completely, and the reason isn't matching haircuts or similar faces. It's something Hollywood usually can't fake very well unless it's real. A genuine sense of familiarity. Jerry Mathers once said very plainly that Tony Dow became his good friend from the moment they met in 1957. It sounds like a simple sentence, but it explains a lot. On screen, Wally and Beaver never behave like perfect brothers who hug every second. They act like the kind of siblings you saw in real American families. The older brother sometimes gets annoyed, sometimes lectures, sometimes looks at his little brother like he's about to faint. But when trouble comes, he's still the one who steps in. The younger brother can be stubborn and mischievous, but he trusts his big brother without question. That kind of connection feels more like habit than performance. What's interesting is that after the Beaver years, they still shared the stage. For example, in 1978, the two of them appeared together in a stage production of Boeing, Boeing. In other words, what you saw on screen wasn't just a 6-season contract. It was a friendship that lasted many years, long enough that audiences mistaking them for real brothers is completely understandable. And if you once believed Beaver and Wally were real siblings, number 7 might make you laugh even more. Because even the name Beaver doesn't come from the animal the way many people assume. It actually comes from a real-life story that stretches far beyond Mayfield. Number 7. The name Beaver is not the animal. It came from a World War II nickname. There's a very charming misunderstanding I run into all the time whenever I bring up Leave It to Beaver with newer viewers. People hear Beaver immediately think of the animal and assume it was just a cute family nickname, the kind of thing parents call a kid, because it sounds adorable. And honestly, that makes sense. A suburban little boy, a family sitcom, a name that sounds like it was born to go with the smell of apple pie and white picket fences. But the truth actually takes a much longer road, one that stretches way beyond Mayfield. The name Beaver was not invented because it sounded cute, and it wasn't because somebody happened to love beavers. It came from Joe Connolly, one of the show's co-creators. According to biographical pieces and obituaries about Connolly, he once had a shipmate in the Merchant Marine whose nickname was Beaver. And that name stayed with him like a little scrap of paper stuck in a jacket pocket for years. A man's nickname on a ship from a completely different era, and then years later, it quietly drifts into a writer's room and becomes the name of one of the most famous little boys in America. You watch Beaver running around the neighborhood, but behind that name, there's a hint of the sea of metal, and of that dry kind of humor people used with each other during more serious times. Isn't that fascinating? Number 6. Hollywood really is a small town. June Cleaver is connected to Ralphie from A Christmas Story. There are nights when I sit around digging through old movie trivia the way people dig through drawers looking for family photographs. Not to hunt for scandal, but to find those little details that suddenly make pop culture history feel much more personal. And there's one detail that genuinely surprised me because it's so interesting. Two worlds separated by an entire era turn out to touch through one very thin thread. Just put June Cleaver and Ralphie side by side. On one side, you've got a suburban mother from the 1950s. Neat hair, a gentle but steady voice, moving through the house, like the kitchen is the place where everything has to stay in order. On the other side, you've got that Christmas season little boy from the 1980s in A Christmas Story, eyes lighting up over a toy with the whole movie soaked in a completely different kind of winter nostalgia. Two comforting American icons, each belonging to a separate era, with no scene and no script connecting them. And yet, the connection is in the last place anybody would expect: the family tree. Peter Billingsley, the boy who played Ralphie, had a mother named Gail Billingsley. Gail was related through the Billingsley family to Glenn Billingsley, and Glenn was once married to Barbara Billingsley, which means June Cleaver herself. So the worlds of June and Ralphie end up linked through the winding road of relatives and marriage. And if hearing that makes you feel like you need a sheet of paper to draw a diagram that is completely normal, this is exactly the kind of family connection that, if you bring it up at the dinner table, makes somebody put their fork down and say, "Start that over from the beginning." And speaking of what sits behind an on-screen image, number 5 takes us away from the Hollywood family tree and back to television itself. Because Ward Cleaver did not just stand in front of the camera, he stood behind it too. Number 5. Ward was not just the dad on screen. Hugh Beaumont also worked behind the camera and directed the final episode. Is anybody watching this video who was a fan of Ward Cleaver? Ward has that very classic American father quality. He doesn't need to yell, and he doesn't need to threaten anybody. One look at Beaver, and the boy already knows he's gone a little too far. And if you like Ward, because he always seems like the man who knows what to do, here's a fact that makes that image even more interesting. Hugh Beaumont, the actor who played Ward, did not just stand in front of the camera. He also stepped out of the role and into the position of controlling the rhythm of an entire episode. Most notably, Beaumont is credited as the director of the final episode Family Scrapbook, which aired on June 20th, 1963. What makes that so satisfying is how perfectly it lines up, almost like fate. Family Scrapbook is the kind of episode that flips back through memory, with the family sitting together as if they are opening a photo album and looking back over moments that have already passed. And the man guiding the rhythm of that album is the actor who played the father. It feels like Ward is not only closing the Cleaver family story on screen, but also personally closing an era that audiences had lived with for years. Number 4. Even hardcore fans may not know this. Season 1 had Ward doing an intro voiceover before the theme music. Now that we're getting into the final facts, I want to stop on one very small detail, but it's the kind that can make you squint and say, "Wait, really?" This is not some wild behind-the-scenes scandal. It's a little piece of television memory. The sort of thing where two people can both swear I watched Beaver as a kid and still remember it differently, simply because they actually saw two different openings. Back when American television still felt like a real family evening, plenty of shows liked having an adult voice guide you in before the story began. Almost like you had just stepped into the living room, hadn't even sat down yet, and the host of the house greeted you before the theme music kicked in. Leave It to Beaver did that too, in its first season. In Season 1, Hugh Beaumont Ward Cleaver himself had an opening voiceover on each episode, saying a few lines to introduce that night's subject. And if Ward's voice was the greeting at the front door, the person keeping the rhythm inside the Cleaver house was somebody else entirely. At number 3, I want to talk about the character who may seem like she's just standing in the kitchen, but was actually the one constant presence across the entire series. Number 3. The truth a lot of people miss. June Cleaver appeared in 100% of the episodes. Anybody watching this who feels confident they know. Leave It to Beaver by heart. Alright, I've got a little test question for the real die-hard fans. Out of the 4 members of the Cleaver family who appeared the most consistently without missing a single episode, a lot of people would guess Beaver because the show is named after him. Some would guess Ward because the father is always there to teach lessons and clean up the trouble. But the answer is June. Barbara Billingsley, who played June Cleaver, has a very rare distinction. She appeared in every single episode of the original series. She mentioned this herself in interview material for the Television Academy. Beaver may be the center of every prank and every mess, but June is the one who keeps that house feeling like it has a familiar rhythm. Whether the episode revolves around school neighbors or some new foolish idea Beaver has gotten into, you almost always see June somewhere. Sometimes it's just a few lines at the dinner table. Sometimes it's only a short moment in the kitchen. But those small moments are exactly what make Mayfield feel like a real home. The kind of place where there is always an adult worrying about dinner, listening to a child talk, and keeping everything from drifting completely off course. Number 2. It did not need to explode right away to become immortal. Beaver won through reruns across generations. There is no denying how famous Leave It to Beaver became. But every now and then, I still see younger viewers asking this question. Why would a sitcom that premiered in 1957 stay in people's memories for so long? And the slightly backward truth is that Leave It to Beaver did not necessarily have to be the show that took the country by storm from minute one in order to become an icon later on. A lot of people grew up with Beaver through reruns, so it feels as if it had always been there, always loved instantly. But if you look at the landscape of American television at the time, things were not quite that simple. Britannica has pointed out that there were other suburban sitcoms during that period that were considered more popular, while Beaver later became the real model of the 1950s suburban sitcom in collective memory. So how did Beaver win? Not through one explosive moment. Beaver won because you kept running into it over and over again and again, until it stopped feeling like a show you remember and started feeling more like a familiar sound in the house. You're flipping channels, you hear a few seconds of the opening theme, or a line of dialogue that sounds familiar, and suddenly it feels like somebody switched on a light in the memory room. That is the power of reruns. They turn a show into a habit, and then they turn that habit into nostalgia. And there are very concrete signs that Beaver entered that kind of television ritual status. The Los Angeles Times once wrote about TBS airing a 24-hour Leave It to Beaver marathon on Christmas Day in 1994. A program that gets aired like that is no longer just something people watch to check it out. It gets turned on to create a mood, to feel comfortable, to hear a familiar rhythm again. And once a show lives through reruns, there is one thing that decides how it will be remembered: the way it ends. Are you ready for the final truth? Take a deep breath with me before we close out today's list. Number 1. It ended while people still loved it. Beaver stopped because of a decision that went against Hollywood. Some shows end because they are forced to stop. Some end because they go on too long and wear themselves out. But Leave It to Beaver ended in a way that still feels special to me even now, because it stopped like someone who knows how to stand up and leave the party while everything still looks good. In 1963, the show ended not because of some huge scandal, and not because anybody hated it. The truth is so simple that if you hear it with modern ears, it almost sounds unbelievable. Jerry Mathers, the boy who played Beaver, said very plainly that he wanted to go back to being a normal student. He wanted to go to school, like his friends, play sports, have afternoons that were not swallowed up by shooting schedules, and stop living as a machine that moved from tutors to the set and back again. In other words, Beaver chose real life instead of choosing to keep living inside the image the whole country knew. And right at that same moment, television itself was standing at a crossroads. There are stories that the network wanted change, wanted the show to shift, expand, and refresh itself to fit a different phase of TV, including ideas involving color and format. Just imagine that for a second. If Beaver had continued, it might have had to change its skin in ways that could have left audiences barely recognizing the old Mayfield they loved. One path meant stretching the show out through change. The other, meant stopping while everything still looked the way people remembered it. And they chose to stop. Honestly, that may be the very thing that made Leave It to Beaver last. Not because it had no weaknesses, but because it knew how to protect what mattered most. In an entertainment world that usually has a habit of squeezing every last drop out of success until the flavor is gone, this decision ran against the current. It kept Beaver a bright memory instead of dragging it out until it wore down its own image. I've just walked you through all 20 secrets of Leave It to Beaver. Now it's your turn. Out of these 20 facts, which one surprised you the most? Are you on team grew up with reruns on TV or team watch the full DVD versions? I'm genuinely curious because every person carries a slightly different version of Mayfield in their head. Tell me in the comments, and let's see whether our memories overlap at the exact same spot. And if you want me to keep doing these 20 secrets videos, go ahead and suggest the next classic sitcom we should dig into. I'll see you in the next video.